Welcome back, everyone. This is the Pinedo Brothers podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Very happy to have you here. Unfortunately, today we are speaking about some more heavy hitting issues, things that really affect, especially people of faith, but all people across the world can look at this and be very sobered and saddened by something that happens like this. Obviously, Israel was attacked this past weekend, Saturday morning, and sudden surprise attack, which people are calling kind of Israel's 9/11. So today we're going to be talking about religious persecution and how it's not a thing of the past. It is something that's happening today and is fully present and impacts both Jews, Christians, and even Muslims. People of all faiths in different parts of the world are heavily impacted by religious persecution. It's not a thing of history. It's happening right here and right now, and that's something that we forget kind of in today's in our society here in America. Things go up and down, but we forget how bad other people have it in other parts of the world. So of course we want to start off with what's happening in Israel, because this is brand new. The war, Israel is now at war with Hamas and terrorists in the region, Islamic terrorists who have come in and launched this horrific surprise attack. I mean, I saw some of the videos of people going door to door in villages and towns along the Israeli border and just mowing people down. And of course, at the music festival. What have you seen, JP, that's really.
I've seen more than I would care to relate, I imagine most of our listeners have seen or heard more than what I can relate here. I think the lasting image that I get out of this is I think back to a Bible quote where you are called to weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn. Um, and there's a lot of mourning going on right now. And so that with the images of all of the dead innocents out there, as Catholics, you and I in our artistry focus on innocence and then the loss of it so many times with our horror film that we're producing right now, the Socrati, is we're focusing on this horrific subject because it is so present in our minds that it's horrific that these innocents are being slaughtered. And so when you are faced with the images of all these innocents being slaughtered, and there's no equivocating about it. There's no equivocating where you say, well, you can see both sides or something like that. Absolutely not. There's one side that is purposefully out to slaughter innocents, and that
Mhm.
is why
Well,
they're in the region.
yeah, I mean, I
There's
think the way
another,
I see it is that you can have two different sides to a battle, but a surprise attack is a surprise attack on attack on civilians is an attack on civilians, and something that's like this, where people are literally parachuting down from the
yeah,
sky on people at a music festival. Like, how is that in any way a justified act of war?
right. And what I was wanting to button up the point was,
Hmm.
you know, the pro-Palestinian, well, the pro-Islamist extremist side that you see that's now been espoused by so many people on the left is saying, well, oh, it was an act of aggression by Israel. And there's what about all of the IDF atrocities that's happened? And I think back to um, Chesterton's The Ball on the Cross, and the devil takes up the hero of that novel up into the sky, and he's tempting the hero, and he's showing the hero a religious state that is just what he thinks the hero will think is a perfect state, where the church is triumph and the church and the state are in perfect union, and he shows that there's one soldier of this state that um, is brutalizing an old person who can't move fast enough in orderly fashion. And the hero says, "What's going on here?" to the devil, who he's not sure is the devil. It's just some supernatural person giving him a vision. And that the devil says, "Well, the slow need to be made to move faster. And this is how it's done." And he says, I would have, the hero goes back and says, "Okay, you need to get behind me, Satan, because I would have understood if you'd said that even in the best of regimes, there are bad soldiers. But what you're saying is that this is the feature of this regime and not a bug, not a
Mm-hmm.
sad side effect." And so you have, on one hand, there have been atrocities committed by the IDF. They're not gloated over. It's a sad side effect. And there's children that are dead now in the Gaza Strip as a sad side effect of Israel defending themselves. But it's not the feature. And that is what we saw over the weekend, which is that is the point of them existing, was to create these atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's no equivocating on this. And hopefully, members of the left that are equivocating will see this, get out of the echo chamber, and see what's going on for what it is. But it's been disheartening that there's been so much equivocation. In any
Mm-hmm.
case, I'm sorry, I don't mean to derail.
No, I mean, I think that kind of going to the topic of what we're discussing here, obviously religion plays a huge role in this attack. Um, this happened on a Jewish feast day, um, where a lot of that part of that is obviously because there's less defenses and people are more can be taken by surprise. But I think it also has a bit of a vengeful um, attitude as well to strike on a day of celebration. Um, and so that's horrific, and I think we see that um, happening across the world. But it's really, I think, um, it's hard because I think obviously the Holy Land is a special place to Christians as well. It's a special place to Jews and to Christians and to Muslims. But I think that if you were really to have a scale for who has the best claim to the land, I think it's hard to deny that ancestrally and historically speaking, the Jews do have the best claim to the land. They had it for thousands of years during biblical times. Um, and so, I mean, that's getting into the whole geopolitical aspect of it, but it also very closely tied into the religious aspect of it as well. Um, and of course, Israel and the West allying with Israel has caused a lot of conflict, and it's caused a lot of the problems, like 9/11, of course, being related to that as well. So unfortunately, yeah, I think in the Middle East, you can say that there's just really been um, it continues to be a place where horrific things continue to happen and to come out of. What do you think?
Yeah, when I went to go visit the Middle East, I was shooting that little project over there, and the takeaway I had from that is this is a land that's bathed in blood, um, and that continues to be true. Even now. I mean, it's mostly Jewish blood, but a lot of Christian blood, and a lot of uh, blood from the people of Muslim faith as well. So I don't really like the idea of getting into who has a better claim or not. I think the Jews are there, and the if the Jews can defend it, they will they have the claim to it. And the Jews have been there for a long time, as far back in recorded history as we can go. The Jews have been there. So if you want to go down that road, you're going to have plenty of firsthand primary documents to back you up, far more than any other firsthand primary documents you have anywhere else. Um, but besides the fact um, that the land is bathed in blood, and even more now over the past weekend, I am also struck by the fact that they are older siblings in the faith. And the Muslims are, compared to the Jews, upstarts. They've been around um, for the past
Hundreds of years.
millennia.
Mm-hmm.
The past millennia, they've been around, but they are, as far as Catholics are concerned, heretics because they've branched off and split from the the Catholic Church, taking part of the Catholic faith with it. Um, but the Catholic Church definitely predates the Muslim faith as well. I'm sure this will all get flagged on YouTube, but hey,
Mm-hmm.
we'll continue to speak.
Yeah, I would. eh, I, of course, I don't know a whole lot about the Islamic faith, but I think, I learned a good amount of it in college, and I was studying history. I would really be interested if anyone just so happens to accidentally, come across this video somehow, if YouTube is not censoring it. Um, if you are of the Islamic faith or if you have knowledge of Islamic history, that would be a great, I think, conversation, wouldn't you say, JP, to have them on and just kind of hear their perspective on whether it be the faith or even about the Israeli conflict. Um, this is I think, of course, this is something that, like we were saying, this is obviously a attack on innocent people, and there's
For
going to
their
be.
religion. For
Hmm.
it's I think it's actually not really much of a comparison to 9/11. 9/11 was an attack for religion. For the It was just an attack on Americans, which is just, it's not just a just. It's as bad as we can get here. But we don't use the word persecution to describe 9/11, but it does apply here. And
Hmm.
we use the word persecution to describe many other things that are going on in the world that people probably haven't heard as much about.
Hmm.
But it's definitely applies with this attack this past weekend.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, kind of going off what you just mentioned, this is not the only type of persecution that's taking place in the Middle East. The Middle East, obviously, being a hotspot for conflict throughout the centuries, but a little bit to the north in kind of the southern Caucasus regions, Armenia, which is largely Christian, almost 100% Christian, and large contingents of Catholicism as well, is being targeted by the country of Azerbaijan and Turkey, which, if you go back, I think is a little bit less than 100 years. Turkey unleashed through the Ottoman Empire unleashed a genocide against the Armenian Christians, and now the country is being targeted again. And just a couple of weeks ago, Azerbaijan released a similar surprise attack on Armenians in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, and there they bombed them out with rockets and similar aggressive maneuvers. And now that entire population is fleeing. All of them are fleeing their ancestral homelands and trying to get deeper into Armenia. Um, of course, I'm simplifying. There's different parts. There's different aspects to the story. But obviously, I've covered it a lot. So if you want to read more about it, you can go to the Catholic News Agency. But it's a very
We'll
kind
put
of
the
similar
links in the
situation.
description for people. We'll
Hmm.
put the links in the
Hmm.
description. Be sure to send it to me, Peter.
Yeah, yeah. So this is it's a really sad reality that both Christians and Jews are being targeted in the Middle East very heavily and very aggressive, and within a few weeks of each other. Um, it It's interesting to note, though, that these are pretty much the Middle East is made up of Islamic countries. Um, Armenia stands alone in a sea of Islamic countries. Israel stands alone in a sea of Islamic countries, and these are countries, so you can say they're minorities in the region that are being targeted and persecuted for being their religion. I don't think that if you had Armenia being, there obviously there's different geopolitical factors at play, but if Armenia was not Christian, would it be being targeted this way? No, not at all. Um, so it's a sad reality, which I don't think that we have focused enough at all on the persecution that's happening in the Middle East today. Do you
Yeah,
know anything?
we're
Go ahead.
so sheltered. It's amazing. We're so secluded. I was seeing and hearing all of what's going on this weekend, and all I could do is go and hug, my wife and my children. It's amazing because I'm struck by the fragility of what we have here in the West. Um, in the United States, we get persecuted for our beliefs, but it's a white sort of martyrdom. If it's any martyrdom at all, it's not bloody, and we I'm struck by how close we could come to that very easily, and would be cheered on. It seems would be cheered
Mhm.
on by all the people that are cheering on um, the slaughter of our Jewish elder siblings in the faith. And Armenia, we there are Christians in here in the United States that have been here for maybe a generation or two that remember very firsthand the aggression of the Turkish Empire very closely. Um, Turkey has long had a long history of trying to move to stamp out Christians in the area. Um, so this is nothing new, and I think if anything, we're seeing an escalation. The great historian Hilary Belloc, with his great foresight, saw that this was going to happen, and lo and behold, it's happening. Where there are the Muslim states in the area are targeting the Christians and the Jews with incredible incredible veracity. Um, so I guess the question that I have immediately is: does it tie in with what's going on in Russia and Europe, and then we see all the Muslim contingents in even in the United States, but even more in Europe, cheering this on. It seems like this is a hotbed that's just a powder keg. The world is a powder keg that's waiting to explode.
Mhm. Yeah, this is, I think you're seeing an escalation across the world, of countries who are regional powers who have always had the bigger stick in that region, but have been held back because of the United States being the watchdog across the world, being able to enforce certain, at least certain bounds of some certain minimums of international law. Um, we have, and if you just look at what's going on in Armenia, Azerbaijan rolls through Nagorno-Karabakh, killing these Armenians and forcing the vast majority of them out of their homes. Um, and what does the United States do? The United States, we sent a couple of envoys over to Armenia, which I suppose you could say is better than nothing, but also at the end of the day, doesn't really do too much if they go there and be like they report, yes, the situation is pretty bad, and if that's about all that you're doing, then that's not very helpful at all. In the case of Israel, at least it is good that we have, we developed the Iron Dome with them, which is great. It's an incredible uh, creation of technology. The fact
Mm,
that they have something that can do that.
mhm,
So the United States has traditionally kind of served that role of helping to maintain the balance of power in those regions. And I think across the world, you're starting to see that really slipping, and
mhm,
it's ending in real life deaths.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that the Spanish Empire struggled with. I've loved to study Spain, and there was a time where the Spanish had the same status that we do now, as in the United States, as the global preeminent power. And we, I don't think, are nearly as thoughtful about it as the Spanish were. Where, okay, what's the line between being too much of a totalitarian presence around the world, and where is our responsibility to make sure, since we have the means to be a global police force, that we help protect innocents from being slaughtered, especially our innocent allies from being slaughtered, like Israel, who's an ally. Um, I am a little concerned that this is not. I was pretty hard on the left earlier in this podcast, but what we're speaking about now is something that's on both sides, where we seem to have lost any sense of thoughtfulness and want to implode in on ourselves like a dying star when it comes to international relations. Is it too much to ask for bureaucrats to have like a resident historian on board where we can say, like, look, this has happened before, guys. This is probably not a good idea to allow it to happen again.
Hmm.
Um, because a lot of this is very forecastable. If you give $6 billion or however many billions of dollars to in a state, a religious oligarchy that funds terrorists, especially terrorism that is aggressive towards your best ally in the region, you're probably going to get an increase of terrorism. Um, doesn't take too long to look back. You probably just have to look back towards the last Democratic president to get an example of that. So could we get maybe at least like a 20-year, is someone who's an expert in history, if that goes back 20 years? If
Hmm.
we could do 200, that'd be great. If we could do 2,000, that would be amazing, because we could learn a lot from the Roman Empire as well on this score.
Hmm.
So how do you govern effectively when your your people wants to focus on, you know, getting their latest boat or whatever it is? Like that, I'm
Hmm.
not saying that we shouldn't have priority for ourselves. That's true. We need to protect our own citizens, just like Israel is protecting its own citizens today. Um, we must do the same. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have international obligations, and those obligations ultimately coincide with our own because they allow us to maintain our status as the preeminent power in the globe, which is a good thing to have on all counts. So we need to have a little bit of nuance on both sides of the equation here, both the left and the right. And I think a little bit of a knowledge of history might be helpful. We don't have to look that far back. Look at the British Empire. We can leave a link to that podcast and how they lost their status. So yes, it's tricky. And yes, you and I probably can't go through everything. We definitely can't armchair quarterback this. But there seems to be an incredible lack of history. Could we get a bureaucratic historian, a historian that advises all these bureaucrats, please?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, Congress has the Library of Congress, where you would think they have all the books in the world there to get that knowledge. It's right there, but it doesn't seem like they walk across the street to go visit that and read up very often. Um, and of course, this is not just limited to the Middle East. This is happening across the world. This is happening in most, I would say, what impacts us most Catholics. Uh, the largest impact is felt in Nigeria, country in Africa, that 90% of the documented deaths of Christians are in Nigeria. 90% of martyrdoms that take place for across the world happen in Nigeria, which is a country that is continues to be extremely war torn. Are you familiar at all with the situation going on in Nigeria, or have you heard about this?
Yeah, I've definitely heard about it. I'm not as familiar as you are, being that the fact that I'm not a journalist. But I know that if a Christian professes Christianity in Nigeria, you run a high risk, especially if you're a Catholic, especially if you're a priest, high
Hmm.
risk of being kidnapped, tortured, and murdered for your faith. So martyred
Yeah,
for your faith.
yeah, and
And
just
we don't hear about it.
hmm, hmm, yeah. Um, it's not it's really shocking when you read the stories of what's happening. Things like that have been happening in Israel happen regularly in Nigeria against Catholics. And as Catholics, you think we would know that, but we don't. It's happening, and it's happening regularly, and there's not really much at all that anyone in the world is doing. Um, I think it
Who are
was
the aggressors in Nigeria? Is that also the Islamic State, or who are the
so
aggressors there?
there's a couple of different ones, Islamic groups, all of them. There's an offshoot, a branch of ISIS that is carrying it out on a lot of the Catholics in the area. The government, it's a complicated situation, but I think you could essentially say that they're complicit in the persecution of Catholics. It was just unearthed, I think, either at the end of last year, beginning of this year, um, that the government has been carrying out a massive, widespread forced abortion program on basically the rape victims of ISIS, who ISIS will roll through um, and leave chaos and raped victims behind in their wake. And then the government will take those people, rescue them, but then because they're tainted, will end up they have this massive forced abortion program, and that's happening to Christians and Catholics in Nigeria, and yet we don't know it. So I think
Why do we not know about that? Why? Like I've heard about it. I don't know nearly as much as you, but most of us don't. Why?
well, I think it it's an unfortunate reality is that we also do have a tendency to care most about the regions that affect us the most. Nigeria doesn't really impact us
Right. We're
um,
not allied with Nigeria, but
very
we are
much.
Catholics. Why don't we hear
Yeah.
about it as Catholics?
Well, I don't think that Catholics are in tune with Catholic news sources as much as they are with CNN or Fox and things like that. Um, I work for a Catholic news agency, but the average
Right.
Catholic probably doesn't know too much about the Catholic news
Right.
agency. They probably read a few articles here and there, but at the end of the day, you're not watching it regularly. You're not getting that constant stream like you do with Fox and CNN.
As a
Um,
journalist, though, as a journalist, have you ever asked a member of the clergy, like, why aren't we hearing about it from the like? We were at church, and um, one of our pastors was saying how another priest was going to go to Nigeria to visit his family. He was a Nigerian priest, and he said, "I just hope he doesn't get kidnapped." And people laughed, and the pastor goes, "This is not a joke," and people laughed again as if he was doubling down. Why have you ever got a sense, as you speak more with the hierarchy than I do? Um, why does the hierarchy not speak about it from the pulpit? There's so many things I wonder about, and this is one of them.
mhm. um, I I think that's a really excellent question. I haven't really spoken too much. I haven't asked that question directly to people at the tops of the church in America. So I've been able to speak with priests and bishops and people from Nigeria, and then obviously I've spoken with plenty of bishops here. But that's an excellent question that I should definitely ask them more about. Um, we do send, as a church, we do send aid to Nigeria and countries that
Yes,
are being
yes,
persecuted.
yes,
So there is that. So it's good that we're not doing nothing, but of course
yes. You're right.
there
I wasn't trying to say that. Yeah,
there is more. You're right. There is more awareness that needs to be brought up, and kind of like you can see them as a Catholic ally, right? Because they're a Catholic. It's a Catholic
right.
country.
What I'm
Um,
what I'm getting at here is that the idea of Christendom is not that old. The Holy Roman Empire fell in World War II. It was not really a power long before then, but the Holy Roman Empire was the idea of Christendom. It was a gathering of all the Catholics together that saw themselves as a more physical embodiment of the church militant that we see as a more spiritual sort of laity on a day to day, everyone in the church pews. So I'm not saying that we all need to gather arms at all, but we need to start thinking of ourselves as Christendom again,
Mm,
especially now when we're seeing all these persecutions. And let's talk this time. Let's include the Jews as part of Christendom because they are our older brothers and sisters. So as these persecutions start to ramp up, let's think of, obviously we're not saying we got to go and baptize all the Jews to make them a part of Christendom, but they are our older siblings. So let's think of this world as the Judeo-Christian world, the whole idea of Christendom that we used to have.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Obviously, you can't make all the peoples have good feelings with each other. Obviously, there's going to be tensions between Jews and Christians, which we've seen video of recently in Israel of
Oh
Jews.
yeah,
But um, but it is true that we do share that faith heritage. That I think we do tend to kind of minimize. We do tend to also just in terms of Catholic to Catholic, even minimize the fact that we don't know too much about Nigeria. Um, and again, it's not, we shouldn't just view it as we need to go, we need to do something to help them. That's true, we do. But we also do have things to learn from the Catholics in Nigeria. We as American Catholics can
you're
benefit
right.
from the
You're right.
faith of the Catholics in Nigeria. Obviously, they're willing to suffer and die for their faith. That's one thing. Another thing is that um, Nigeria has the highest mass attendance rate in the entire world.
Amazing.
There's no country that has a higher mass attendance rate than in Nigeria, where you can be killed for going to mass. That's
Amazing.
pretty crazy. Um, so again, that's what, to my point, is like it's not just them who can benefit from us knowing more about them. We can also benefit from the faith and the witness that they give.
What an amazing point you made. Because you think about it, look when persecutions for the Catholic Church started, way back at the beginning with the Roman Empire and the feeding our fathers of the church in the Colosseum to the lions. That blood that soaked into the sand of the Colosseum fed the church. It, the church sprung out of that blood soaked ground and became what we see now, that is spread across the globe, billions strong. So you attack the Christians, the Catholics in Nigeria, and the church becomes stronger. And I think that same thing is going to happen here, where you attack the Jews in Israel, and Israel is going to become stronger. The blood of martyrs is a powerful thing,
Hmm.
and we can learn from that, absolutely. How can we learn that from that? What can we take as Catholics here?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think we can definitely take their boldness. We can take their abandonment to the will of God. Speaking with um, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, speaking with a bishop from Nigeria, and his confidence in God is completely unshaken. And he bishops here in the United States have a problem with staffing, parish staffing. Their priests, they don't have enough priests for parishes. The problem he has as a bishop is that his priests keep on getting killed and kidnapped. Um, and yet he's here still completely confident in that he's doing the work of God, and his faith is not shaken by it. Um, so I think that it can we can take the confidence and the trust in God from them. That's the first thing. But of course, there's many things that we can take and learn from them. I think that that kind of shifts my mind to other parts of the world as well, who are also being persecuted. Catholics are being persecuted, obviously, in China, which we don't know the full extent of what the persecution is. It's it's very possible that that's actually even more. It could be even worse, but we don't know because it's the CCP,
Right.
um, Communist Party
And
of China, that is super secretive, and we
and
don't
they're
know what they're
very
doing.
good at blocking information getting out.
Hmm. Hmm. But and then it's not there. It's in Nicaragua as well, in South America. I was actually just speaking with someone from Nicaragua yesterday, and they were telling me, yeah, it's completely silent. Like you cannot so much say as anything critical of the government, even though the government is quashing the church and is arresting bishops. There's Bishop Alvarez, has been imprisoned for standing up for ordinary villagers, basically. Um, but also in Pakistan, there's been persecutions that were basically mobs have rolled through Catholic areas of the country. And but what did the Catholics do the very next day, or maybe say 2 days after this mob of Islamic mob rolled through and burned down this village? They held a mass outside of their burned down church the very next day. So that is the witness, and I think that is the lesson here that we should be learning as we look and see this horrific rise in persecution. There's there's a horrific rise in persecution, but there's a heroic rise in response. Um, so there's many different things that you can take from that. But it's beautiful to see the heroism that rises from those ashes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a good time to think about a gut check. Where are you? Are you ready? Are you ready to defend your faith, defend your family? Are you ready? I mean, in the United States, maybe it just takes getting involved. Maybe it takes getting involved in your parish, getting involved in your local government, making sure you cast an informed vote. You know, getting out of your echo chamber and reading more news outside of your comfort zone. I think there's a lot of ways that we can do more here in the United States with our privileged status.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think to the point of the echo chamber, I think that's really important because if we're thinking about what is giving rise to this persecution, there's many different factors, of course, but I think you can safely say that every group that's carrying out these persecutions is in their own echo chamber, where they believe that this is the right, we are the religion, and we cannot. There's no tolerance. There's no other option than to kill these people, even if they're innocent civilians. Um, so what about that aspect of it would you say? Because that, I think that's an important thing about the echo chamber, because we're starting to fall into that a little bit in the United States, where we're getting angry at each other, angrier than ever before. Getting angry is fine, disagreeing is fine, but it's at the point where we're kind of all just screaming, and not really talking. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm I'm on both sides of that as far as the last part you said, where screaming and not talking. We should definitely be listening, but some things need to be said with emotion. Sometimes that's the only way to punch through. I'm not saying to go out and scream at your neighbor, but I understand very much people's screaming and pain and anguish over what happened this weekend. And I understand very much people screaming over pain and anguish over the terrible things that are happening in Nigeria every day. Although you don't really hear about that at all. Um, so maybe it's not a good idea. But I do think getting out of the comfort zone and having conversations with people that you disagree is very important. It's actually something that I've been thinking about quite a bit this past couple of these past couple of months. Past couple of weeks really, but I mean it's intensified. I would love, we started a nonprofit recently uh, called the Film Guild, and the idea that I originally had with the Film Guild was to educate people to educate kids on how to make films or how to do things with the media instead of having to go to a $50,000 film school, get your hands dirty, and start working in film right away. Now, obviously, we're a long way from getting that accomplished. We don't have the means for all of that. But something that really occurred to me in the past couple of weeks is the idea of, well, maybe you don't have to start full on. Maybe it becomes a film guild cafe where people meet, we analyze media, and then we talk about it and we argue about it. I think centers of culture where people can disagree vehemently, maybe screaming and yelling, but still staying in the room and listening to each other out are very needed right now. And so I had this vision of the film guild as a place that has is training, but also a critique ground where you analyze what you're intaking and then argue about it
Mm-hmm.
passionately,
Hmm.
sort of like the cafes. Um, Obviously, this is a long way as well from becoming a reality. But what do you make of something like that?
That sounds awesome. That sounds really very needed. Um, Practical skills on one, training in your art, training in the form of film, how to produce, how to make a film. That's really needed very much on the, especially people who are coming from a faith background, who want to tell not necessarily your stereotypical faith films, but something that's imbued with those values. Um, there's lots of people who would love to be able to tell that, but there's no means and no knowledge of how to do that. So I think that would be wonderful. But if you can start um, something like you were saying, using having that cafe back in the day when people would go there, and that would be the place to discuss ideas, to discuss the cutting edge ideas that would form the next day. I think
Mm-hmm.
that was very much the place to be in the Enlightenment era, where a lot of terrible ideas came from. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that good ideas can't come from a similar type of thing. So I really
I
like
think
the
they
sound of
can.
that.
I
Yeah.
think they can. I absolutely think they can. Yeah, I was jotting out a series of notes that are probably unintelligible. Let's see if I can pull it out. It was like a big. It was a big circle that feeds itself, where you start off with being able to create the art, and then you can turn around and analyze the art, and so then that way you're consuming it because you need a means of distribution and consumption. And so, but then as you're consuming it, you are actively critiquing it, which hones your people's tasks. So it's not just creators, but it's whoever wants to have a say in their community or in the world at large comes in and hones their skills at intaking this media. The more that you challenge yourself to not just think about something, but then talk about it, which pushes your thoughts further. And then you
Mhm.
throw those thoughts at someone else, you become better formed on the inside. And
Mhm.
then while you're doing that, then the idea is the same time is that you are consuming this, which feeds into more. And so my idea was like with this cafe, it should be for profit, even though it's a nonprofit running it. But the people that come in are you buy a coffee and you argue about things, or you buy a good meal and you argue about it, but it's generating revenue that needs to continue to feed the entire process. So
Mhm.
yeah, I can't find that circle that I made, but it was this long-winded thing. I wanted to hold it up for everyone so that they can see how my brain works a little bit. But anyway, what do you make of that? Sorry.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we've touched on it many times on this podcast in the past, that as Catholics, as conservatives, we need to be doing a better job at actually creating a culture for um, for these ideas. We're good at kind of thinking ideas, but we're not we don't have a tangible way in which we're actually impacting the culture. Just looking at the abortion battle is a perfect understanding of that. We made a great stride with Roe v. Wade, and then we've suffered defeat after defeat after defeat since then, when it comes to the legislative battles, because the culture is not there. And so it's through things like this that I think you actually do impact the culture.
Yeah.
Um, legislations is huge. Culture is even bigger, because that sets the stage for the decades and for centuries to come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pitch this idea now. It just
What was
came
the
up when you asked that question.
what was the name of the idea?
The Film Guild, and
The
then it
film
turns
guild.
into that's the name of the nonprofit, but one of the the hubs that it creates, it would be a film salon. You know, the old salons of old. It would be a film salon where you go in and you have coffee and do other things like that.
Mhm.
But you need to consume the art and then you need to argue about it. And this one,
Mhm.
I've had ideas where you're like, okay, well, would you put it in the deep red district? But no, I think these are inner city type of things where people really can argue from both sides and really
Mhm.
shape a discussion. But beyond that, consume art that's outside of the echo chamber. Like that's the big thing, is that you need to have art on both sides that really challenges people to reevaluate their assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
I
think
think
this needs to be in centers, like hubs where there's a lot of different types of people.
yeah, I mean, just going back to the idea of the old, the old cafes,
Yep.
it, the idea of a city is that where it's where you go to exchange goods and services and ideas. And I think if you kind of are going back to that original concept of a city not just being what a lot of cities in at least the east over here are becoming, shells of their former selves, where there's just crime ridden, kind of elevating the city back to what it was, back
Yeah.
to the exchange of ideas and where people go and cultures clash and create something really awesome and new. Um, so I really like that. So listeners, stay tuned for that coming down the road, and I'm sure we'll discuss it more. But speaking of arguing, we can't go a whole podcast with, of course, not mentioning last month the synod of
Oh yeah.
synod, or the synod as the blah, 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 the thing that's happening in the church that nobody knows what's going on, but people in Rome seem to think it's important, and nobody
The
else does.
assumption in the media is that it's going to change church teaching. That
Yeah,
uh, that very clearly is the assumption.
yeah, yeah. No, I think, yeah, reading New York Times coverage of it, and
I mean,
and
not even
Washington
leftist
Times.
outfits. Like the Daily Wire assumes that too at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't, as a journalist, I do have to read like New York Times and Washington Post pretty
Hmm.
often, so I don't read
Hmm.
Daily Wire quite as often,
Hmm.
but I'm sure that them
Hmm.
as well. This this is an interesting thing that's happening. Uh, it's really, for me, my experience has been is that it's one of those things where it's like a pet project, almost, where they're just sinking all this money and time into something that in the end is not really going to have much impact at
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
Um, what listeners might not know is that a synod is an advisory council. Essentially, it's not a church council. It's not Vatican III. Um, it's not the Council of Trent. These people are voting. Everyone's talking like, "Oh, first time that lay people are voting and that lay women are also voting." It's incredible. They're going to be impacting the church, and their voices, do have an impact, obviously, but no vote that they're casting is actually changing any aspect at all of church law. All of these, at the end of the day, are resolutions passed that are suggestions, are ideas to send to the Pope. So at the end of the day, that's what that is.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to look back to history. And there was a synod that the Pope called for looking at whether or not the church, giving an advice on what the church should do about how it should update teaching on contraception. And the synod convened and they recommended that the church uh, give its blessing towards Catholic couples doing contraception. And the Pope turned around and released Humane Vitae, which shocked everyone. And undoubted, like, set it in stone as the encyclical that we all turn back to for why the church does not condone and never has and never will condone contraception, um, which is a stumbling block for many people. But I think it's exacerbated because everyone expected, especially after the synod, that the church was going to change its church teaching. So I think the thing that we have to remember is all these outlets, these news outlets, they're not, I don't think that it's ill intent that they're spreading this assumption that the church is going to start blessing homosexual unions. um, I think that that's really what's expected. That's what I get out of it.
Mm. Mhm.
We have to be, I think our church hierarchy needs to be in the business of changing church teaching. Um,
Mhm.
so I think that's the frustrating point for me.
Mhm. Yeah, and of course they're talking. All these outlets are talking about, oh, the church is going to start condoning blessings of same-sex couples.
Right.
They're like, it's one step down from marriage, but hey, it's one step.
Yeah.
Um, that, of course, I think just comes from this massive confusion that continues to surround the church. And I was speaking to a an individual couple. This was during Pride Month in June, when a couple of churches, one in DC and a couple in New York and whatnot, were doing Pride masses. They were celebrating
Yep.
Pride masses, um, and a lot. At least the one in DC, like the idea behind it isn't necessarily a terrible idea. The idea that you are reaching out to this community, and it's a community that needs reaching out to and is not being properly served in many ways by the church. But what these people were telling me is that what we need, as like a homosexual community, we need charity, yes, but also clarity on what the church teaches, what's the truth, what do we believe as Catholics. And you have things like this, and this
It's not
sense of
clear.
confusion surrounding the synod. It's not conducive to um, souls going to heaven. It's not.
That's right.
It's not. It's not clear, and we need that clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. We lack clarity, and it's quite sad. But we've had more clarity in the past, and we'll get more clarity in the future. But right now, we
Mhm.
lack some of it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the thing, church teaching remains unchanged,
Right.
um, and the treasure trove of the church from 2,000 years of history and everything that's come from that, we have access to that, and of course, we
Yeah.
have access to the sacraments, and so it's a wonderful strength to take from turbulent times.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Should we have time for a quick take?
Yeah, so we're about out of time, but before we go, we like to do a quick little take on something culturally relevant. Today, talking about Bruno Mars concert, which he hasn't been doing too much, I feel like, but apparently he was in Israel last week, which just comes days before this horrific attacks that happened over the weekend. But he did something pretty cool. It was, I'm not sure how you say the feast day that they had, but that feast day that was happening, um, he led the whole like, concert hall, although it was an outdoor concert. The whole concert was singing this cultural religious song in Hebrew that the Jews apparently sing during that time, and it's very beautiful to see him actually doing that, which I'm pretty sure he's not Jewish or religious, but having that appreciation for the faith of the people there during an important festival and feast day. Um, Very beautiful to see, and then even more impactful now that they've suffered this kind of an attack. So if you haven't seen the video, might want to go over to social media or YouTube or something, and it's pretty cool to see.
Great. I like it. No, that's good. I think that it's important for us artists to remember I think back to the great artist of Shakespeare when he speak. We have to remember people of other walks of faith. As Catholics, we need to remember this. And Shakespeare was definitely not a Jew. I think by best accounts he was a Catholic, but he wrote that great Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, and I thought this had a great impact for today. This has a great corollary to your point about Bruno Mars and to what happened this past weekend, where this is the villain, and yet Shylock is the villain, and yet Shakespeare inserts such human pathos into this villain, which gives us one of the great. Do you mind if I just read it real quick as
Go
just a
ahead. Yeah.
corollary part of it? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? It's good. It's
Hmm.
very much the same.
Hmm.
It's very much the
Yeah.
same as what we see right now. We need to not forget humanity.
Well, thank you for joining us, everyone, today. We'll probably um, we'll definitely be back next week, but we're glad that you are here with us. This, of course, was a bit more of a heavy hitting episode, so thank you for sticking with us. But please keep the people of Israel and all the people involved with this conflict in your prayers, and please keep people of all faiths who are facing persecution throughout the world in your prayers. This is the time in which we need to cling more closely than ever to our trust in God and to His protection um, for those who are suffering these horrific tragedies. So until next time, thank you very much. Thanks, JP, and we'll see you on the next episode.